The wind howled like a wounded animal as Theresa Pierce clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air of the train depot, a desolate outpost on the edge of nowhere, Colorado Territory, 1879. Beside her, Margaret Sullivan's teeth chattered uncontrollably as they huddled together on the hard wooden bench, their trunks and bags stacked beside them like a futile barricade against the unrelenting cold. "We're going to die here," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind's mournful keen. "3 days with no train, no help. This God-forsaken place will be our tomb." Theresa squeezed her friend's gloved hand. "We are not going to die, Maggie." The station master said someone would come. But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. The station master had abandoned the depot 2 days ago, riding east to seek help after the telegraph lines went down in the blizzard. He hadn't returned. The last of their food, stale bread and dried apples, had disappeared that morning. The depot's coal supply had dwindled to nothing yesterday, leaving them to burn scraps of paper and broken chair pieces in the small stove, which now stood cold and useless in the corner. "What kind of fool women are we?" Margaret said, "thinking we could make it in the West on our own?" Theresa didn't answer. They'd both had their reasons for leaving Chicago. For Theresa, it had been the scandal of her broken engagement after discovering her fiancé's true character and his pregnant mistress. For Margaret, the smothering grip of a domineering father who viewed his 30-year-old daughter as nothing more than a household servant. Freedom had seemed worth the risk when they'd boarded the train heading west 2 weeks ago. Now Theresa wasn't so sure. A noise outside drew her attention, not the howl of wind or wolves, but something different, something human. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, gripping Margaret's arm. Before Margaret could respond, the depot door creaked open, sending a blast of frigid air swirling around their ankles. Theresa instinctively reached for the small derringer hidden in her coat, pocket her one concession to her father's warnings about the dangers of the frontier. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, face hidden beneath a snow-crusted hat. In one gloved hand, a lantern swung, its golden light spilling across the floor like liquid warmth. It was the first warm light they'd seen in days. The stranger stomped snow from his boots and pushed the door closed against the wind. When he turned, Theresa saw a man's face, weathered and tanned beneath several days' growth of beard. His eyes, startlingly blue, moved from Theresa to Margaret with surprise. "Didn't expect to find anyone alive in here," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in the cold air. "Train's been delayed on account of the pass being snowed in." "We know," Theresa replied, her hand still gripping her hidden pistol. "We've been waiting for 3 days." The man raised his lantern higher, illuminating the dismal scene, the women's pale faces, the cold stove, the pitiful pile of luggage. Understanding crossed his features. "Name's Jackson Zimmerman," he said, setting down the lantern and shrugging off his heavy coat. "Most folks call me Jack. I've got a cabin about 2 miles from here. Not much, but it's warm, there's food, and you ladies look like you could use both." Margaret's eyes widened with hope, but Theresa remained cautious. "Why should we trust you, Mr. Zimmerman?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You shouldn't, madam. Not out here, but your choices appear limited to freezing to death or taking a chance on me." He gestured to the derringer she was now openly holding. "You're welcome to keep that pointed at me the whole way if it makes you feel safer." Theresa exchanged a glance with Margaret. They had no reason to trust this stranger, but he was right, their options were non-existent. "We accept your offer, Mr. Zimmerman," Theresa said finally. "I'm Theresa Pierce, and this is Margaret Sullivan." Jackson nodded. "We'd best get moving. Storm's letting up some, but it won't last." "Can you both walk?" Margaret stood on shaky legs. "We'll manage. I've got a horse outside. We'll take turns riding." He began gathering their bags, hefting the 2 largest trunks with surprising ease. Outside, a massive black gelding stood patiently in the snow, steam rising from its nostrils. Jackson secured their bags to the saddle, then helped Margaret mount. "You first, Miss Sullivan. Miss Pierce and I will walk alongside." Theresa kept her hand on her weapon as they set off, the lantern's glow creating a small sphere of light in the vast darkness. The snow had indeed lessened, falling now in lazy flakes rather than the horizontal sheets of the past days. "What brings you ladies to this particular circle of hell?" Jackson asked as they trudged through knee-deep snow. "We're headed to Denver," Theresa replied, keeping her answer deliberately vague. "My cousin owns a millinery shop there." Jackson glanced at her, his eyes knowing, long way to travel for hat making. "Some journeys are about what you're leaving behind, not where you're going," Theresa said stiffly. He nodded. "Ain't that the truth?" They fell silent after that, conserving energy for the difficult walk. True to his word, after a mile, Jackson helped Theresa onto the horse and took Margaret's place walking. Despite her exhaustion, Theresa found herself studying him as he led the horse through the snow. He moved with the confident grace of a man accustomed to hardship, and there was kindness in the way he occasionally checked on Margaret, who was clearly struggling in the cold. Just when Theresa thought her friend might collapse, a light appeared in the distance, steady and warm, unlike their swinging lantern. "There it is," Jackson said, pointing. "Not much further now." The cabin materialized out of the darkness, larger than Theresa had expected, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. As they drew closer, she could see it was sturdily built of thick logs with a covered porch and even glass windows. "You live here alone?" Margaret asked, her voice betraying her concern. "Just me and some livestock," Jackson replied, helping her toward the door. "Previous owner was a rancher with bigger dreams than skills. Bank took it when he couldn't make payments. I got it cheap." The interior of the cabin brought tears to Theresa's eyes, not from emotion, but from the blessed wall of heat that greeted them. A fire blazed in a large stone hearth, illuminating a space that was plain but surprisingly tidy. A table with 4 chairs stood near the cooking area, shelves lined one wall filled with books and supplies, and a curtained alcove presumably hid a sleeping area. "Make yourselves comfortable," Jackson said, immediately stoking the fire higher. "I'll bring your things in, then see about some food." When he stepped outside, Margaret collapsed into a chair. "Thank God," she whispered. "I truly thought we might die in that depot." Theresa nodded, too overwhelmed by their change in fortune to speak. Instead, she moved around the cabin, taking in the details. Despite its rustic nature, there were touches that spoke of care: a colorful woven rug before the fire, curtains at the windows, books well organized on shelves. This was a home, not merely shelter. Jackson returned, bringing their bags in a blast of cold air. "Storm's picking up again," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "You ladies arrived at the right time." He moved to the cooking area, pulling out a cast iron pot and various ingredients. "Hope you don't mind stew, it's been simmering all day." "It sounds wonderful," Margaret said sincerely. While he worked, Theresa finally set aside her derringer, tucking it back into her coat pocket. Something about the man's straightforward manner had eased her suspicions, or perhaps it was just the seductive comfort of warmth and the promise of food. "How did you know to check the depot?" she asked. Jackson stirred the pot before answering. "I didn't exactly. I was heading into town for supplies before the pass closed completely. Saw smoke from your fire yesterday but couldn't get through until the storm let up some." He looked at them both. "You're lucky, another day end." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The stew was rich and hearty, filled with chunks of venison, potatoes, and carrots. Theresa couldn't remember when food had tasted so good, and even proper Margaret forgot her manners enough to mop her bowl clean with a piece of bread. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Theresa asked. Jackson's expression grew distant. "Army, spent some time as a scout after the war, learned to make do with what was available." "You fought in the war?" Margaret asked. He nodded once. "Union, Missouri 8th Cavalry." Something passed across his face, then a shadow of old pain, and Theresa felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. This man had seen things, survived things that she could scarcely imagine. "I'll make up beds for you ladies," he said, changing the subject. "You can take the bedroom." "I'll bunk out here by the fire." Margaret began to protest, but he held up a hand. "I won't hear otherwise. My mother would haunt me till my dying day if I let ladies sleep on the floor while I took a bed." After the meal, Jackson disappeared behind the curtained alcove, emerging with blankets and pillows which he arranged near the hearth. He then showed them to the small bedroom, which contained a decent-sized bed and a chest of drawers. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but it's clean." "It's perfect," Theresa assured him. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Zimmerman." A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "Jack," he corrected. "Mr. Zimmerman was my father." Later, as she and Margaret settled into the surprisingly comfortable bed, Theresa found herself staring at the ceiling, listening to the howl of the wind outside and thinking of the man sleeping by the fire. "He seems decent," Margaret whispered, as if reading her thoughts. "Yes," Theresa agreed. "But we barely know him," Margaret yawned. "What I know is that we'd be frozen corpses without him. That counts for something in my ledger." Theresa couldn't argue with that logic. Still, as sleep claimed her, she wondered about Jackson Zimmerman and what circumstances had led him to this isolated existence. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through the cabin's windows and the smell of coffee. When Theresa emerged from the bedroom, she found Jackson already dressed and cooking breakfast. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said, glancing up from the frying pan where strips of bacon sizzled. "I'm used to early hours." "The smell of coffee would have roused me from the dead," Theresa admitted, accepting a steaming cup gratefully. Jackson's mouth quirked in a half-smile that transformed his features, making him appear younger and less weathered. "You've had a rough few days. Figured you could use a decent meal." While they ate bacon, eggs, and surprisingly light biscuits, Jackson explained their situation. "Train won't be running for at least a week, maybe more. Pass is completely blocked with snow." Margaret's face fell. "A week, but we were expected in Denver by now." "Not much can be done about that," Jackson said pragmatically. "Telegraph's down too, so no way to send word." He hesitated. "You're welcome to stay here until the train's running again, or when the weather clears, I can take you into town. There's a hotel there, nothing fancy, but it would get you closer to the station." Theresa considered their options. The thought of being stranded in this cabin with a stranger for a week was daunting, but so was the prospect of an uncomfortable hotel room they might not be able to afford if their stay stretched too long. "We'd be grateful to remain here for now," she said finally. "Of course, we insist on contributing for food and inconvenience." Jackson waved a hand. "No need, I've plenty of supplies, and it's no inconvenience having company." Something flitted across his face, a brief expression of loneliness quickly masked. "Nevertheless," Theresa insisted, "we won't be idle guests. We can cook, clean, mend, whatever needs doing." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, there's always work on a ranch, even a small one like this." The next days fell into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm. Margaret, despite her city upbringing, proved adept at domestic tasks, keeping the cabin tidy and even discovering a talent for bread making. Theresa, more restless by nature, joined Jackson in his outdoor chores whenever weather permitted. She learned that his livestock consisted of 2 milk cows, a small flock of chickens, the black gelding named Midnight, and a temperamental mule called Congressman, because he's stubborn as hell and makes a lot of noise without doing much, Jackson explained. On the third day, during a lull in the snow, Jackson took Theresa to a small rise behind the cabin. The view stole her breath, mountains rising majestically in the distance, their peaks glittering white in the sun, valleys blanketed in snow stretching as far as the eye could see. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "That's why I stay," Jackson said simply. "Some folks can't see past the hardship to the beauty, but it's there if you look." Theresa glanced at him, struck by the quiet passion in his voice. "How long have you been here?" 4 years. "Came west after the war, worked as a scout, then cattle driver, finally saved enough to get this place." He gazed at the mountains. Needed somewhere quiet after all that noise. Something in his tone made Theresa bold enough to ask, "What noise?" His eyes, when they met hers, held depths of memory she couldn't fathom. War, death, cities, people talking without saying anything worth hearing. The rawness of his answer touched something in Theresa. For the first time, she saw not just the competent, somewhat taciturn rancher, but a man who had sought healing in solitude. "I understand needing to escape," she offered. Then, surprising herself, she added, "I left Chicago to escape humiliation. My former fiancé, proved to be less than honorable." Jackson's expression darkened. "His loss," he said with unexpected fierceness. That evening, as Margaret and Jackson played checkers by the fire, Theresa found herself studying him with new interest. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior, evident in the way he treated his animals, the care with which he'd created his home, and the respect he showed to her and Margaret. The next morning brought a clear sky and Jackson's announcement that he needed to check his fence line for damage from the storm. Theresa, restless after days indoors, volunteered to accompany him. "It's hard work," he warned, "and cold." "I'm stronger than I look," she countered. "And I've never minded cold." He studied her, then nodded. "Dress warm. We'll take midnight and Congressman." The ride through the snow-covered landscape was exhilarating. Theresa, atop the surprisingly well-behaved mule, followed Jackson along the perimeter of his property. They found several sections of fence damaged by fallen trees or the weight of snow, and she helped as best she could while he made repairs. "You're not what I expected," Jackson commented as they worked side by side clearing snow from a partially collapsed fence. "What did you expect?" Theresa asked, pausing to catch her breath. "Honestly, more complaints, less help." His blue eyes held frank admiration. "Most city women I've known wouldn't last a day out here." "Perhaps you've known the wrong city women," she replied with a smile. They worked in companionable silence after that, completing the circuit of the property by mid-afternoon. As they rode back toward the cabin, the sun low in the western sky painted the snow in shades of gold and pink. "Thank you," Theresa said suddenly. Jackson looked at her questioningly. "For saving us, for your hospitality, she gestured at the beautiful landscape, "for showing me this." He ducked his head, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Theresa said firmly, "they wouldn't have." That night, while Margaret slept, Theresa remained by the fire, unable to settle. Jackson sat in a chair nearby, whittling a piece of wood with precise, careful strokes of his knife. "What are you making?" she asked. He held up the half-finished piece, a bird of some kind, wings outstretched in flight. "Eagle, keeps my hands busy on long winter nights." "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "You're quite talented," he shrugged. "Just something my grandfather taught me." Theresa watched his hands move, strong and capable, yet capable of creating something so delicate. "Tell me about your family," she said impulsively. Jackson's knife paused. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "Not much to tell. Father died when I was 12. Mother raised me and my sister in St. Louis. She passed during the war. Sister married and moved to California." He glanced up. "What about yours?" Theresa told him about her parents in Chicago, her father's shipping business, her mother's social ambitions. "They weren't happy about my decision to leave, especially after the broken engagement. They thought I should stay and weather the scandal, and you disagreed. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere people didn't whisper behind their hands when I walked by." She stared into the fire. "Somewhere I could discover who I am apart from everyone's expectations." Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West is good for that. Out here, you're judged more by what you do than who your family is or what mistakes you've made." They talked long into the night, sharing stories from their pasts, discovering unexpected commonalities despite their different backgrounds. When Theresa finally retired to bed, she felt a curious lightness, as if some burden had been lifted through the simple act of being truly heard. The following days brought a deepening connection. Theresa found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the quiet companionship they shared while working. She noticed things about him she hadn't before: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful consideration he gave before speaking, the unexpected gentleness of his hands. Margaret noticed too. "You're falling for him," she observed one afternoon as they prepared supper together. Theresa nearly dropped the potatoes she was peeling. "That's absurd," Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Is it? I see how you look at each other when you think no one's watching. We're just getting along well," Theresa insisted, but a warm flush crept up her neck. "It's more than that, and you know it." Margaret's expression softened. "It's not a bad thing, Tess. He's a good man." "He lives in the middle of nowhere, Margaret. We're going to Denver, remember?" "Plans can change," Margaret said mildly. "Life has a way of offering unexpected paths." Theresa had no answer for that. A week after their arrival, Jackson rode into town to check on the train situation. He returned with news that the tracks had been cleared, but another storm was approaching. "Train should arrive tomorrow afternoon," he told them. "If you want to be on it, we'll need to leave early morning." The news should have brought relief. Instead, Theresa felt a sharp pang of regret. She'd grown accustomed to the cabin, to the rhythm of life here, to Jackson's presence. That night after Margaret had gone to bed, Theresa found Jackson on the porch, staring at the star-filled sky. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. "Worried about missing the train?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "I'm worried about making a mistake by getting on it." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "What do you mean?" Theresa took a deep breath. "I came west looking for a new beginning. What if—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "What if that beginning is here?" Jackson was silent for so long she feared she'd misread everything. Then, cautiously, he reached out and touched her cheek. "Are you sure? This life isn't easy. It's beautiful, but it's hard, lonely sometimes." "It doesn't have to be lonely," she whispered. He drew her closer, his hand warm against her face. "Theresa," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "I've been alone a long time. I'd given up hoping for anything else. Then you appeared in that depot, half frozen but still fighting. I've been falling for you every day since." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. The next morning, Theresa explained her decision to Margaret over breakfast. "I'm staying," she said simply. "At least for now, to see where this leads." Margaret smiled, unsurprised. "I know." "I could see it happening from the first day." She squeezed Theresa's hand. "I'll be fine in Denver. My cousin will help until you can join me if you decide to." "You're not shocked or disapproving?" "Tess, I've known you since we were girls. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him, not even Edward." She glanced at Jackson, who was giving them privacy by tending to the animals. "And he looks at you the same way." Jackson drove them both to the depot in a wagon he borrowed from a neighbor. The platform was crowded with passengers finally able to continue their journeys after the long delay. Margaret hugged Theresa tightly. "Write to me. Let me know you're happy." "I will," Theresa promised. "Visit when you can." As the train pulled away, Margaret waved from the window, her face reflecting both concern and happiness for her friend. Theresa waved back until the train disappeared around a bend, then turned to Jackson. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Theresa shook her head. "Not one." The ride back to the cabin was filled with plans and possibilities. Jackson spoke of improvements he wanted to make to the property. Theresa shared her ideas for a garden come spring. The future stretched before them, unwritten but full of promise. As they crested the hill overlooking the cabin, Jackson stopped the wagon. In the late afternoon light, the small ranch looked peaceful, smoke curling from the chimney, animals in their pens, mountains rising majestically behind it. "It's not much," he said, echoing his words from their first night. Theresa took his hand in hers. "It's everything." Spring came to the Colorado Territory, turning the valleys green and bringing wildflowers to the meadows. Theresa stood on the porch of the cabin, her home, now watching as Jackson mended a corral fence. Her letter to her parents explaining her decision to stay had been met with initial dismay, then grudging acceptance. Margaret wrote regularly from Denver, where she was thriving in her cousin's shop. The wedding had been small but joyful, held in the town church with neighbors and a few friends in attendance. Theresa wore a simple blue dress rather than traditional white, a choice that scandalized some but felt right to her. This wasn't a conventional beginning, after all. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard days of backbreaking work, worries about weather and crops, moments of missing the conveniences of city life. But there was also profound joy in building something together, in the simple pleasures of a shared meal after a day's labor, in falling asleep beside someone who valued her strength as much as her softness. Sometimes, on clear nights, they would sit on the porch like they had that first evening, looking at the stars and marveling at the path that had brought them together, a blizzard, a lantern's light in darkness, and the courage to recognize that home isn't always where you plan to find it. Jackson came to stand beside her now, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Theresa smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Just that sometimes you have to get lost to find where you truly belong." He kissed her temple, understanding in his touch. "Lucky for me you got stranded in that depot." "Lucky for us both," she corrected, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. Above them, the vast Colorado sky stretched endlessly blue, promising tomorrow and all the days after days they would face together, warmed by a love that had first kindled in the light of a cowboy's lantern on a cold winter night.